Hey everyone, welcome to Editor Q&A. My name is Randy Surles. I'm a book coach, ghostwriter, and a developmental editor, formerly a ranger and a Green Beret. And I'm here with my buddy Dan. And go ahead, Dan, you can introduce yourself.
Hey Randy, good to be here again. Dan Pace, retired SF guy and current author. And Randy and I like to get together and just talk through some of the pitfalls and perils of trying to transition from one career to the other, kind of start up as a writer, and then all the ins and outs of writing and the post writing process that kind of help bring it all together. So good to be here today, Randy. How's your week going?
So far, so good.
I mean, we're not in Iran, so that's a good start, right?
Yeah, used to be in Iran, but no longer.
Oh yeah, no longer, man. No longer. No more Middle East for me, thank you. But hey, got it. Wish everybody the best of luck that's involved on any of the sides.
I did have a few friends that got stuck in like New Zealand and they had to go around the world the other way in 26 hours to get home.
Oh, that's horrible. I gotta think connecting to New Zealand is horrible no matter which way you go, but the other way has got to be even longer. I mean, it's just far, right? You got to get to mainland Australia and then go back the other direction across the Pacific. And
Well,
I was talking.
they're based in England, so
Oh,
it's
shit.
a little
No
closer
chance.
one way and really far the other way.
That's terrible. I have a buddy who's flying out to Australia from the States Thursday, and he was saying he'll fly from Atlanta to San Diego or San Francisco. I don't remember which. And then it's something stupid like a 20-hour flight to Adelaide, like all the way from San Francisco. So I guess it's good that it's a straight flight, but whew, that is a long time in an airplane.
I took a Mac flight to Australia once.
How's that?
It was, well, I'd say I took a Mac flight. I started in Charleston, San Antonio, stayed overnight, San Francisco, stayed for 2 nights, Hawaii, stayed for 1 night, and then Australia, and then back. I stayed there for 2 months on leave in the middle of the Q course, and then went back 2 months later.
I mean, that's the way to do it, though, right? If you're going to take the flight, got it. But at least you stayed long enough to make it worth the trip, right? Like, I'm going to be murderously jet lagged. It's going to take forever to get here. But if I'm on the ground for, 40, 50 days, all right, you're getting your value.
Yeah, that was good. All right, today we're going to talk. We've talked a lot about memoirs and nonfiction, so we're going to focus on fiction today. And I'm going to announce that I am the fiction expert, and I will engage I will elaborate and engage with any questions you have on how to write fiction.
So I do for sure. Primarily a nonfiction guy. I've done one kid's book, and I don't know that I wrote that in a way that we would describe it. I mean, it's not that complicated a story to tell, right? So what I really want to know is, as a nonfiction writer, I write narrative nonfiction. I usually go small to big. I usually start with a story that's kind of personal to me that I either enjoyed or hated or thought was really evocative. And so I'll start to write that story out, capture the dialogue, and really bring it to life. And then I go small to big, right? I'll zoom out from there and like, okay, well, what would make a good book if you wanted to hear about what made that story happen or how you got to this or what happened after that story? And I kind of zoom out. And so I don't world build because I don't have to, because I'm writing about the world that already existed. So really I'm writing scenes with an existing construct. And so one of my big questions moving or looking at fiction writing is, what do you do with that the other way? Do you start big to small? Do you start small to big? How do you put together a fiction story?
It's a good question. I'd say it depends on who you are and what your writing style is. Some people are planners and some people are pantsers. Pantsers usually write whatever they want. They write whatever scene they want in whatever order they want. They may write from start to finish. They may write a couple scenes forward, around. In my experience, pantsers rewrite more than planners because it's hard to drop the breadcrumbs, leave the red herrings, and follow the clues for a thriller or a crime. Even an action, to build the character arc, sometimes you need to plan ahead in order to get those scenes in the right order or make sure you don't miss something along the way. And so the people who plan um, can, plan a whole, I've met people that just, well, the Rebecca Yaros, who famously wrote Fourth Wing, which one of the best-selling series out there now, but people stacked around the block at midnight in Barnes and Noble, just like Harry Potter did back in the day. She famously did an interview where she said she outlined the book in 3 months and then wrote it in 3 months. And it's a freaking big book too. I also saw a podcast not too long ago with gosh dang it, I can't remember the guy's name. It's too bad. But he was a pantser for a long time, and then James Patterson got a hold of his name, read something he wrote, something, and said, "Hey, I want to team up with you," because he does a lot of collaboration, kind of ghostwriting kind of stuff, where he helps outline the book and then he gives it over to a good author who writes it, and he edits it and tweaks it a little bit or something like that. And this guy said, "Hey, I heard about you, and I'm thank you very much. I really appreciate you asking me, but I'm a pantser. I'm not a planner." And he's like, "Well, okay, let's do it your way." So they ended up writing a chapter. And, they each had a POV, and they wrote a chapter back and forth, kind of challenging each other, putting each other in weird situations. And then they, tweaked it a little bit and published it. It did pretty well. Of course, it's James Patterson, so it's got a little bit of oomph behind it.
Little springboard.
Yeah. And that took like 6 or 8 months, whatever. And of course, by then, James Patterson had written 5 other books at the same time or something, probably. And then he said, "Okay, hey, I did it your way. Let's try it my way." So they outlined it in a month, and he had the guy write it for him, and then they tweaked it, and he wrote it in like 2 months. And there was no rewrites required, while the other one required a bunch because they made it up as they went along and didn't have all the stuff laid. And that guy said, "I'm never not outlining a book again." And he's already got a bunch of bestsellers out there and things like that. So I just think I don't think there's any wrong way, but the difference is, in my opinion, if you're outlining, you're less likely to have as many rewrites, just because you'll have figured out all the plot problems and the character arc problems ahead of time. That being said, there's a bunch of different methods out there for planning big, but it helps to write from your heart. That's what makes memorable books. It helps for you to have some similar emotional experiences to your protagonist, that you can map your emotion onto different scenes, if that makes sense. And that's also good for narrative nonfiction. But if you're writing your memoir, you're going to do that anyway. But if you can take the emotion of the memoir and stick it into the fantasy book or the fiction book of some sort, and raise the stakes and the emotions of the characters to a point where the reader's like feeling like the pain of the character, that helps. And some people don't seem to believe that or understand that or have ever heard of it. And so they write a fantasy book. They love fantasy, so they just write a fantasy book, but they don't take real world situations. Like, you can take, a crisis situation in your real life where you felt what this character's feeling. I didn't face off to the dragon, but I did this, and I felt anxiety and fear, and then map that into the character so that he's sweating, his heart's beating, he's exhausted, and putting that on the paper. And what I've seen a lot of authors do is, instead of putting the 5 senses and remembering a feeling that was similar to what the character's feeling, they end up telling us everything, which is not immersive and doesn't excite the readers as much. And I constantly, especially with AI nowadays, AI is really good at telling stuff. And so people will default to AI. Some people will use it to write their whole book, unfortunately. And it's just a lot of summary, a lot of telling, and not a lot of showing. And by showing, I mean mostly showing with the 5 commandments and not so much thoughts. there's a time and a place for thoughts and background story and remembering stuff, obviously. But if you can show it, it's more powerful. And then when you need the thoughts, put the thoughts in. But it shouldn't be, most people are using 80% thoughts and 20% showing when it should be something like the opposite.
I can see the danger of how that happens, right? Just because I think, I mean, I don't know this, but I know I as a writer certainly do. I think a lot of other writers tend to describe, right? You're going to describe the things. You're going to put it down in words. You're probably a word sort of person because you read a lot, you write a lot, and that's the default is like to describe the scene. But transitioning from that to immersion or creating immersion is difficult, and it takes a different look. Like for me, a lot of the times it's remembering the scene and remembering the people involved, and then kind of remembering what those people were like and imagining how those people were acted in the scene, and then trying to staple it together. And I got to think fiction a lot of times is the same way. Like you're taking people and scenes, like you said, scenes that you knew, scenes from your life and parallels that you drew, but also characters from your life. I mean, everybody has those characters in your life. You're like, what the hell would this person do? And that person has got to become, like famously Sam Gamgee was, Tolkien's Batman in the war. And I've got to think a lot of other people do similar sorts of things where you're bringing, your own experiences to life and kind of letting that character write, his or herself, or him or herself. But yeah, just, so were you a pantser? Because you kind of described both. You're like, well, you could be a pantser or a planner. Probably planners have a slightly easier time, but then you really got to be a pantser is what I heard with all that kind of immersive writing before you can really get, the kind of hard in there. Like I feel that comes more from a pantser than a planner. I mean, I mean, you feel like you got to have a little bit of both. Otherwise the book's not going to work. I mean, what do you think?
So I think there's also different levels of writing, right? There's the global story. That's the main plot and all the main characters. And then there's writing the scenes themselves. And the scenes need to move the reader and compel the story forward and be compelling to the reader. And the global story is really the place that needs the most planning. Okay. So when you're talking global story, you're talking about, one or two sentences, which are the controlling idea of the book. And then you use those two sentences to look at every chapter and say, am I addressing this issue? Like Harry Potter, life is preserved when Harry Potter, with the help of his friends, defeats Voldemort. Okay, right. So now you look at each chapter and like, are we moving towards that objective or moving towards or away? But is it not just, it's not just sitting there and we're just telling them a bunch of stuff. Every chapter is moving and has a value change in the direction or farther away from him obtaining that goal. And that is where the planning comes in. You're like, okay, I don't know how she did it. I don't know how J.K. Rowling did it. But if she was a planner, she was like, okay, he's going to start here. Orphan doesn't know he's a wizard. He's going to end here, defeating Voldemort in the dungeons of, Hogwarts. Okay, how does he get from here to here? Well, he's got to make friends. Where is he going to meet his friends? Well, he's going to meet one on the train, both of them on the train, but they're not going to be good friends until they kill the troll. Okay, so now we got those in there. And then we're like, okay, how does he find out he's a wizard? Oh, freaking what's his face drives up in a flying motorcycle to the cabin. Oh, okay. How does he get into the school? Oh, he gets a letter sent to his house, but there's some problems with getting the letter. Okay, so that's up there. So then you figure out all these pieces, and there's a lot of different methods that will help you figure out so I am an advocate of the story grid method. The Sean Coyne, who's edited 30 years of editing in the editing industry, working for 2 or 3 of the top, publishers in the United States, probably edited 5,000 books. Famously, he has edited most of Stephen Pressfield's books, including Gates of Fire and the Art of War, the War of Art, War of Art,
Art of War, War of Art,
War of Art,
Art of War,
Art of War. So, and among others, okay, and he's also done a lot of other famous authors as well. And so he has this thing called the foolscap method, foolscap being the yellow legal pads that we used to have that we used to have in the Army that were useless because they were legal. We're like, why are
Too big to put anywhere.
But anyway, he was Sean Coyne invented this thing called the foolscap method, where he could plot a book on on the one side of one single page of legal paper, the foolscap. And the way he'd do that is he would identify the genre, and that was really important. And he later on, when he wrote his book, The Story Grid, he divided all fiction books into 12 genres. And so you have action, thriller, crime, romance, status, society. You know, there's 12 of them, and those 12, each one has a primary value that is being played with in the book. Okay, action, thriller, and horror all are life and death. You're talking the reader or the viewer of the movie or the viewer of the play, whatever, came to the book or the movie for action, which means they expect people to be risking their lives and to be in danger, to be wounded, to be running from bad guys, to get close calls, and then have a face-off at the end with the villain of the book or the movie, right? And each act in the story grid, it divides it up into 4 acts, but there's a lot of other methods to divide it into 3 acts. Each act, in order to get the flow of action, has to have 5 pieces, and those 5 pieces will revolve around life and death, security, safety, danger, something like that. So you'll have at least 4 or 5 elements in each of those acts. So you're going to end up with 16 to 20 throughout the book, which is going to keep the reader engaged because they came for action. If you don't do that, you may have this huge chunk where there's no action. And then the reader's going to go, well, where's the action? You know, James Bond didn't do anything for like half the book. That sucks, you know? So that's one thing, is knowing the genre, and the genre is going to help you place this book on the shelf in a bookstore as well, or a category in Amazon, because, you know, I'll talk to authors like, it's a little bit of romance and there's some crime in there. And then we got some action, and then there's a revolution. So there's society. And I was like, okay, what's the primary genre? He's like, it's a mix. I was like, okay, if I was going to the bookstore, where would I find it? Exactly. Like, how are you going to market it if you don't know what your primary genre is? Because it's a little bit easier now online, but you still got to figure out a category for it. And on a bookshelf in Barnes and Noble, it's harder because it goes one place, right? Because fantasy and science fiction, thrillers, crime, horror, you know, romance, there's places for these kind of books. And if it's like everything, if you're saying it's everything and that's what you're saying, then you're only going to put it in one place and you're going to lose half your audience. So you need to figure it out. And you also probably need to focus the writing in that direction as well. And so the other thing that Sean Coyne has is he has obligatory scenes that are expected for each genre for the reader. These are the expectations of the reader. So for a love story, for instance, lovers meet. Happens in the first act, usually in the first 10%, usually in the first two or three chapters. All right. They don't have to fall in love then, but they meet and the readers are engaged. They're like, oh, and they're going to, and I get it. And that's what I came for. Lovers are probably going to break up. Does that mean they're physically going to break up? Not necessarily, but maybe one takes a job in Europe or goes to college in Europe and they get separated for a long period of time. And usually when they do that, one of them makes a mistake and breaks trust. Then when they get back together, that person's got to prove their love to that other person. So these are expectations, and a lot of people are saying, oh, they're tropes or this is the formula. It's not. It's the expectations of the reader. And I'm not saying you copy another book. I'm just saying most romance books with happily ever after have a lovers meet, lovers break up, and the lovers get back together. They also have harmers and helpers. They have probably some kind of triangle going on. I mean, look at Twilight. Look at all those little, kiddie movies that you and I probably make fun of. There's always like team this and team that. The reason there's team this and team that is because there's this triangle, and so these are the expectations of this kind of genre, and so you should write to the genre because the readers expect it. And if the readers don't get what they want, they're unsatisfied with the book, and that's more important than ever because they're going to give you a bad rating, which is going to affect the algorithm, blah, blah, blah. And then we already talked about that kind of stuff. So the global story for a planner is, trying to figure out a plot that goes towards the genre and the value of the genre, has the expected kinds of events that the reader expects, and that all kind of affects the character arc too eventually. So that's a long-winded way of answering some of your question. I don't know. You got any other questions? Probably about 50 more, right?
Yeah, that brought up a lot of conversation topics, right? So I was initially, when I first started writing, not on board with the idea that you should pigeonhole your book, but I've increasingly gotten that way for exactly the reasons you're talking about. Like it's funny, we all think I know better than that. And you're like, actually I don't. And so a lot of times you're right, defining the genre of the book, it doesn't mean that you have to make it a total cliche. Although honestly, cliche can be powerful sometimes. I think people shouldn't be so quick to shy away from cliche when necessary, but it does mean that you should make sure that you're telling the sort of story not necessarily the reader expects to see, because you can surprise them, but it should be in line roughly with what they expect to see, even if you totally deviate from that and kind of walking them down one path and take them onto another one, because there's just so many of those archetypes that are anchored in society. Like, so planning out the next book I'm working on a sequel to The Whale and the Kraken, right? So I'm working on one called The Kraken's Quest, and it's going to be one of the characters. It's going to be a spinoff, and he's going to go on an adventure. But I'm basically taking the Perseus story from mythology and saying, okay, this is the hero's journey. This is unsolvable problem. Everybody's failing. Character is expected to solve the problem. Character doesn't know where to begin, gets sage advice, goes forth and has to gather, the tools necessary to overcome it, overcome some building challenges to build toward the final challenge. Final challenge isn't quite what you expected. Oh no, resolves it. Story complete, right? That trope, if you want to call it that, has been played out 10 million times since at least the time of the ancient Greeks, and probably before that. And it's a human story, but not because I think it's just a total cliche that everybody knows that story, but people love it. They love variations on that story. They love their favorite characters engaging in that story. They love to see the twists and turns that will follow the same basic path, but will bring its own kind of, shine and sparkle to that. And I don't think that's bad. I mean, every story, I think in the end falls back on something that somebody has told before. And if it's totally unique and you're writing like James Joyce's Ulysses, I mean, honestly, kind of alienating for a lot of readers, because you're like, I don't even know what I'm reading here. I don't get it. So, I mean, if you can swing that, you can swing it. But for the rest of us, if you want to tell a story that people really enjoy reading, you're probably going to tie in with a lot of the stuff you just mentioned.
Yeah. And a lot of people, like I mentioned, a lot of people call it, say, I don't want to write a formula. It's not a formula. And the expectation is you write these expected obligatory scenes in a surprising but inevitable way. I know they're going to break up because this is a love story. I love love stories. That's why I picked it up. Why they're going to break up, that's an interesting way. How are they going to get back together? How are they going to meet? All of these things. And then just think about all the ways people have met in romance, rom-coms, and how it changes over the years as well. You remember it was like there was one, girl meets, girl with dog or something like that, where they're meeting through the personals in a newspaper. And then there was You Got Mail, where they're then there's the latest one is they're meeting on the apps, so that's always evolving, and it's always with the new thing to make it more relatable to everybody. But the ending, how they break up, how they get back together, why they break up, that's all the surprising but inevitable. That's up to the creativity of the author. And romance is the biggest selling, genre out there. And if you pick up 20 of them, you'll see that the not the formula, but you'll see these expected scenes in almost everyone. That's why Sean Cohen made these kind of summaries of these genres, because he's read 500 romance or action or crime books and said, this is in every single one of these books, or at least 99% of them. And I mean, your normal crime is the bodies found in the first chapter.
Yeah. It's like the red herring. You identify the process to find it. It's leading you toward another guy. Eventually, oh no, we solved it, but there's a surprise, or the betrayal by the trusted agent. So what I love about this stuff is people, like you said, people treat it like, well, I don't want to write on a formula. Like, no, but think of it like, I don't know, what kind of food you're going to get tonight. Like, there's nothing wrong with fusion cuisine. There's nothing wrong with going to the sushi burrito place. You're like, all right, sometimes you want a sushi burrito, but artfully kind of mixing those things together becomes, really the fusion of kind of known elements into something that's greater than the sum of their parts. But people, I think even people like, I'm writing with no formula, you're going to find yourself using something of a formula, even if you don't recognize it, because there's some stuff that just doesn't make sense. Like, okay, you're going to introduce the character. Whatever kind of book you're writing, you've got to do some kind of introduction character and what he is. You've got to build some kind of challenge for that character to overcome, like something. If it's romance, it's going to look one way. Okay, there's this relationship, we're going to work toward it. If it's crime, if it's action, it's going to look another. But to imagine somehow that, like, I'm going free form completely, I'm just going to stick all this together, it's not going to make sense, right? I mean, it's still got to kind of tell people a story. And honestly, maybe it makes people sad, but a lot of the stories have been told. And so you're going to follow some path that somebody's probably laid out before you. There's no reason that has to be a sad thing. Like, I'm going to invent an entirely new genre. Well, maybe you will. But I bet the genre that you invent, like fantasy, for example, is going to end up becoming a compilation of genres that have existed before, because it's just so hard to get around that I don't even know that it's possible. And I don't think that's bad.
No, and there's nothing to say you can't combine genres, right? You just need to figure out what the primary genre is, action, like which one's coming to the forefront, because that is the value that majority of the readers are coming for. So you'll need to make sure that value, whether it's love and hate, romance, or action, life and death, or justice and justice, crime, is in the forefront of everything, so that the majority of those readers are super happy. And then you'll probably tag on other ones on top of that. Now, you think of, the Fourth Wing, if we've got to go back to the most famous run, there's no romance element to that. It's called romantasy. That's what it's supposed to be in. Is it romance or is it action? Fantasy is usually considered action, but though not always. In this case, it's action. There's tons of action in that book, and the romance is in the background, and it's there, and you can see it. And the ones that came for romantasy love the action, and they're looking forward to the romance. But it's not like happening in the first chapter. You lovers meet, but maybe not the relationship until much later, or halfway through the book or something. Where if romance is in the forefront, you're going to focus on that and the relationship from the beginning all the way through.
When you see that all over the place, right? Like, a lot of books have an element of romance, because romance is something that people are engaged with, even if it has nothing to do with the rest of the book. I mean, James Bond is fundamentally an action with a dash of romance, right? Every one of them almost the same. Ian Fleming's, at least the movies. I actually don't remember the books being quite as romancy, but certainly the movies are always action with a splash of romance. But you can imagine a world when those were inverted, and it's the story of, a British spy going out, and it's really a relationship book about the relationships that he builds, and it's a romancy kind of thing, and the spy job is just a background for it instead of the other way around. So it's just two ways of telling the same thing, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with mixing in some murder and some mystery into, your romance book or your action book.
The author needs to embrace what the primary purpose is, because
that makes sense.
Because that's what the author should focus on to attract those readers, and the other readers will come for it. Because if you're focusing on the love piece and there is action, but it only shows up like twice in the book, the action guys are not going to be happy. And if you're trying to sell it to them, they're not going to rate it really well. So
it's funny you mentioned that, because that plan becomes super evident when you get into post-publication. And I always talk about marketing a reasonable amount, but your audience is who's going to buy your book, right? And if your audience doesn't know what to buy, well, then hopefully you're well established enough that they'll buy it anyway, and they'll just be surprised and plays that, oh, look, he wrote something different. That's crazy. But generally speaking, certainly early on, you're going to market to a segment of the population. And if it's going to be action folks, like you said, you got to give them a little bit of that action, or who's going to buy it? I struggle with this with, narrative nonfiction versus kids books. And you're like, look, I'm selling to a different person. I'm selling to a mom on this side fundamentally, and I'm selling to a retired veteran fundamentally on this side, or an old guy who likes kind of military stories. Really very different audiences, and even all the way down to like the fundamental level of like palette, color choice, platform that you're going to use. Like all of that is apples and oranges for those two different segments. And so as an author, you got to be really careful if you're going to divide your audience like that. I kind of stumbled into it. Now I'm like, well, hell, okay, I'm not sure which one to focus on, but that would be devastating if you were trying to make a living on this, because you got to kind of catch that reinforcement success from like first book sales. Okay, they liked it. The next people are going to buy your second book, the next book, and build on that. Otherwise, you're not building anything, and you're just kind of throwing stuff out there, and you're not going to be able to get any traction, in the community. That's at least my experience so far.
Yeah. So back to your original question, for a big picture, I think planning. I hesitate to say planning is a necessary evil, but it's definitely the best way to avoid a lot of rewrites, because you're going to get all the basics in there, just like I talked about how Harry Potter could have been planned. You're going to get all the pieces of the puzzle in there. If you got red herrings, if you got clues, if you got this obligatory scenes of meeting and breaking up, and the triangle, and how that all fits together, having a plan for that ahead of time instead of just writing off the cuff is going to make sure that those pieces are at least have placeholders in there, if not, part of the whole plan. And then when you get into writing the individual chapters and scenes, you can write from the cuff, but once again, you may end up rewriting that scene a couple times, because ultimately stories about change, and there's change at the large level, and there's change at the lower level of the individual scenes and chapters. And a lot of people, when they come to me as a book coach or just like have a workshop or something, they give me a chapter and I'm like, what's this chapter about? And they're like, well, this is, he's thinking about this and that and this. I was like, where's the conflict? What is changing from the beginning to the end? Does he make a decision? Is he arguing with someone? Is he arguing with himself? What's going on? What's the purpose of this scene? Well, we want to show blah, blah, blah. So can you integrate this with something active and where there's an actual conflict going on, as opposed to he just thinks for 6 pages, which is a real slow part to an action book, for instance. It's real slow to any book, right? So, we need to integrate this with something else, because it's not really serving your reader. And that's another thing that authors have a hard time doing sometimes, is they think that they're writing whatever their favorite thing is, and they're writing for themselves. But if you want to sell your books, you're writing for your reader. And that means every chapter needs to be written for your reader, and it needs to progress the story and not bore them. And so you need to figure out how to do that and still have fun, because you want to write for yourself as well. You want to write what you like, but you gotta appease the audience, right?
I mean, at least a little. It's funny. I love the description of book as change. Like the book is fundamentally, it's a story. You're starting somewhere, you're ending story. And I don't know why, but in my head, it popped in like the exception that proves the rule. Have you read much Douglas Adams, like The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, that whole series? I love, one of the things I love most about his books is it's the opposite, where the character, the lead, Arthur Dent, is this unchanging person. Like he's just the same exact person all the way through the series, but the world changes radically around him instead. And so it's almost turning the entire, idea on its head, where they're like, no, the character doesn't evolve one bit. In fact, he's trying his very hardest to not evolve one lick, but the planet explodes and he ends up traveling through time and space. And this poor bastard is fundamentally still the same simple dude he was at the beginning at the end, but he's just struggling to have things stop changing, unwillingly around him. And it's the same idea, just inverted. And that's just, I don't know, that was an interesting thought that popped in.
No, that's a good observation, because those are called flat character arcs, right? Because they don't change. But that's the same as James Bond, Jack Reacher, Jason Bourne. They Tarzan, Conan, all these, all
Tarzan
these
and Conan, yes.
they already have the way they think about the world, and they go through the world doing what they think is right, and the world changes around them because of it. So these are flat character arcs, and that's when I have a questionnaire for all my clients when they come in, and there's 3 questions. There's like, how does which of these is most similar to your book? The character goes through a big change from the beginning to the end. The character doesn't change, but the people and the world around him are changed as a result of his actions, or there's no change. And the people who check no change are usually writing literary fiction. And I don't edit literary fiction. So when they check that, I'm like, okay, I don't know if this is the client for me. And then we end up talking, and we go into discussion about what their book's about, and maybe even say the accusation, like, are you writing literary fiction? And most of the time they're like, I am, yes. It's like, well, I have to find another editor for you, because I don't do that. I do commercial fiction, which is where either the world changes or the character changes. But that's a good observation, Dan. That's exactly right. And that's fine too. People like that, as long as something's changing, they usually like it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, it's looking at the trope and then flipping it around and saying, well, you don't have to write the trope. You don't have to write things exactly like they are. You could write the inverted version of it, and it could still be good. But again, there's the expectation that people have. They're like, oh, well, surely this is going to kind of smooth out. This guy's going to progress. Things are going to change. And you're like, nope, it never does. Everything else changes, but not him. And that makes it funny. That makes it an amusing story. But you can't imagine. I love that you mentioned Tarzan and Conan, because my kids love to make fun of Tarzan books. They read them, and it's just ham-fisted. Like, I mean, it's good in its way, but Tarzan always solves the problems the same way as he runs through this. Although later, and it's the same with the James Bond movies, later as you look in the series, they actually look at that lack of change, and the author is clearly using that to show that even this guy's changing, right? Because like the new James Bonds, he's always kind of PTSD-ish, and he's kind of dealing with the realities of kind of what he's done over his life. And that wouldn't work if he hadn't spent so long establishing the character as being as flat as he was, right? The only reason it's really interesting is because you're reflecting on all that time, and kind of Tarzan, Lord of Greystone, going back and be Greystoke, I don't remember which, but going back to become like an English noble is interesting because he's, the monkey man for his entire life. And that's just one more way to kind of make things interesting. But really, again, you're falling back on those established stories. And now you're saying, oh, look, even this guy has this established story. And here's a time when it happens. Like, whoa, can you imagine it? I mean, even Conan got old eventually. And, and Edgar Rice Burroughs. I'm blanking on
Burroughs is Tarzan. Howard is
Ron Howard. Yeah.
But I love the Tarzan books. I still read. There's a couple of them that I really love. The Return of Tarzan is my favorite, because he's actually in the real world. Most of them he goes back to the jungle, but in Return of Tarzan, he's in the real world, because he's given up his fortune to his cousin because he was marrying Jane, and he didn't want to deprive Jane of his fortune, so he didn't announce who he was. And he started traveling the world, and it's just awesome. He's on a cruise ship, and saving some damsel in distress from some evil bear sheik or something like that. And then he ends up in like Saudi Arabia, the desert, and there's like a desert lion, and he goes out and kills it in the middle of the night, and everyone's like, "What's going on?" It's so great.
I agree. They're good. They're good for what they are, right? They're not literary fiction, but it doesn't mean they're not entertaining. And yes, until they start getting to like Tarzan and the ant people, I think it was. I mean, sometimes you're just like, all right, Come on, man. We've jumped the shark at this point. Like, let's just stop.
Well,
Tarzan can encounter no more dangerous things.
I've read almost everything Edgar Rice Burroughs has written, and he writes action very well. He also puts a lot of action in there. Like every 3 or 4 chapters, something action each happening, and every single one of his heroes is exactly the same. Like a man's man. Like I defend women, I do what's right, and I don't put up with even if I'm outnumbered and outgunned, I don't put up with bullshit, and I always win because I am the man's man.
Tarzan.
Yeah, and I mean they haven't really done a whole lot of movies on his other books, but some of his other books are freaking great, and he's really good with the just the setting up a heroic situation and having someone like stand up against the odds to do it with the really, really good dialogue, in my opinion. So I if I could write like him, I'd be really happy.
So I love his stuff, and I love Kipling, actually, which is different, but obviously the same period. But one of the reasons I love them so much is they're so, emblematic of the time in which they participated. And it almost like brings you back. It's like you can almost like step out of 2026 and back into like 1890, and like, this is what people thought, and these were not tongue-in-cheek values at the time. And you could kind of get into that world and be like, man, it must have been wild to just be the sort of person that could show up in Africa and like, I'm in charge. And then you do like no self-deprecation. There's no like, whatever this is. Are you kidding me? What are you talking about? Like, nope, this is going to happen. And that they capture that feeling so well that it's just fun to like put on that hat and live in that world for a minute, because it just takes you into a totally different place. And I love it.
I don't know. Did you watch Yellowstone?
No. I heard it's good, but never seen it.
Yeah, it's pretty good, but they had some prequels. And one was starring Harrison Ford, and it wasn't Meryl Streep, but it was another older actress that's really famous. And but that's not the best part. The best part is their nephew was a World War I veteran. He had PTSD, and instead of going home, he went to Africa and became a big cat killer, like a man eater killer. So people would call him and say, "Hey, we got this jaguar that's hunting people," and he'd go out there and take them out. And it's very, very similar to what you're saying, like white savior guy, taking it back to Africa and taking out the man killers for the Africans and the Europeans. So it was really good. It was really well done. And then Conan, yes, he did get old and became king, but in the very last book, he's catching like flying axes. Like he goes into this pirate island and throws an axe.
Still Conan.
He catches it. He's like, back when I was a young man, I learned how to catch axes from the whatever tribe. And he sends the axe in the other guy's head. It was great.
He's still Conan. It's true. He's still Conan. This mighty Thews. I don't even know how to pronounce that right, but it's always describing him. I don't have a lot more time left, man. I think we probably got to wrap up soon, but that was not where I thought the conversation would go. That was super interesting. I enjoyed that.
Yeah. So, I mean, we could go into we went big picture. We can go small picture next time. But yeah, big picture, I think big picture is planning is your best bet. Just big picture planning. And then if you want to write your scenes kind of haphazardly and then later on kind of relook at them and do them again without planning scenes. I mean, just as we finish this off, my specialty now with the story grid that I do, with the company story grid that I contract with, is I mentor people to write better chapters, better scenes, from like compelling from start to finish, focused, and I've seen writers just get phenomenally better after a month or two of the training and skills of planning a scene out, you don't even have to plan it. Write the scene and then apply the story grid kind of methodology to it to tweak it and make it better. And it's really amazing to see some of these authors after 2 months, it's probably rewritten the scene 3 times when they send it to me. They write their first draft, and then they apply the methodology, and then rewrite it, and then look at it one more time, and then give it to me. And I'm like, man, this scene is rocking. It's great. So that's something to think about. We can talk about that next time if you like.
I would love to. And I completely agree. I was sold on becoming more of a planner and less of a pantser. I still mostly pants my scenes, but I plan books and chapters out for exactly the reasons you're describing, is that you just, when you want it all to fit together nicely and neatly, you really want the scenes to lead to one another. You want to kind of plant the seeds here that are going to kind of germinate in later book. And honestly, if you don't plan it, you're going to have to put all that stuff back in later. As you think of it, you're like, oh, it's a great idea. I'm going to go back and put that in. But then you really got to rework the scene, because you can't just throw a sentence in there, right? So you're trying to rework it all. And so I now outline pretty solidly the book, and then I still wing the scenes, and there's still all kinds of stuff that emerges, like, oh, it's great, I'm going to add this and add this and this. But that outline kind of helps shape it and say, like, all right, I just need to make sure I put a little of this and a little of that in to kind of lead this where it's going. You can still be pretty, seat of your pants on a lot of the details, but the structure does help kind of make the thing actually flow better. And you sold me on it. I agree. It's just an easier way to do it long term.
If you're right, and also like if we go back to Operation Pineapple Express, which I helped with Scott Mann with it, if you're writing nonfiction narrative like you're writing, but you're writing memoir, right? That specific book, if you're writing, nonfiction narrative stuff, and you got to figure out your start point, your stop point. You got to figure out what characters you're going to include, because how many people do you meet every day? For most people, right? You can't put all those people in your book between this time and this time. So you have to kind of pick and choose, like, which of these characters are adding to the story I want to tell. And that planning, we took 2 weeks to plan the book out, because in reality, the book was only for 15 days. It only covered 15 days. But Scott and his partner touched like 200 or 300 people that were trying to get out of Afghanistan. We can't talk about all those people. He wanted to, like, hey, yeah, these are we did like 50 interviews, but not all those people made it into the book, because a lot of the stories were similar, even though they're different people. They went through similar trials and tribulations at the time. There's only so many routes into the airport, and there's only so many people who got out and so many people who didn't get. There's 2 options: they either got out or they didn't get out.
That's right.
And then there was only so many types of people. There was Terps, and there was ex-military, and there was family members of ex-military, and there was police, and then there was like HVPs or high value, Afghan escapees, whatever you're going to call those. So that, I only have these 5 people, and then I have maybe 3 or 4 different ways each one, was facilitated. That's 20 people out of the 200 people they touched. So I got to figure out which ones have the most compelling story. And then that took planning. If we hadn't planned that out, we wrote it in 3 months. If we hadn't planned it out, we never would have wrote that book in 3 months. There's no way. It wouldn't have all connected. It would have been a train wreck. So yeah, I just don't see, especially for, I just don't see it as an efficient use of my time if I don't plan the big picture out.
Mm-hmm. I agree completely.
All right,
man, great conversation. Like, lots to talk about next week. I'll ask you about characters next week. I want to hear it. I want to hear how we decide who to put in. Exactly what you just talked about, but on the fiction side, like, a lot of those 200 people, how do you really decide how to build out those archetypes you want to include? And I'd love to talk next week.
All right, we'll do it. All right, thanks for joining us, guys.
Hey, take care, everybody.
Bye.